Hey guys, welcome again to Cyber Up with Chris. This is the HTML beginner tutorials. Before we dive in, if this is your first time learning about HTML, I highly recommend that you watch the first video in this series, the web development introduction. Here I explained HTML and other web development concepts using various analogies to help you better understand web development, front end, back end, and what we're about to start here in HTML. And now let's talk about HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It is the standard language that we use to create web pages. There are other markup languages. You have XML, you have DHTML, but the standard for creating web pages is HTML. With HTML, we define the structure, the content, and organize our website. Things like text, images, heading, the links, the audio, the video. These are the contents of a website, and we use HTML to structure them. So it's also important to understand that HTML is not a programming language per se. It is a markup language, which means it is used to design and organize web pages. You understand? So HTML syntax and core components. The tags, the elements, the attributes, and the comments. These are the main components you need to understand in HTML. If you truly grasp this concept, then you almost covered everything that HTML is all about, because everything in HTML revolves around these four core concepts. So let's begin with the tag. Tags are the basic building block of HTML. They define HTML elements and they tell the browser what type of content that you're working with. Most tags come in pair, like the opening and the closing tag. For example, to define a paragraph, we use the P tag. The closing tag begins with a slash, and it is usually written inside the angle bracket, which is the less than and the greater than sign. So that is just what a tag is. It's just as simple as that. Elements. Now let's talk about elements. An element is a complete block in HTML. It's made up of three parts mainly. That is now the start tag, the content of the tag, and the end tag, which always begin with a slash. So for example, this is a paragraph now. If you look at the paragraph, you see it begins with the opening tag. This is a paragraph, is the text, which is the content of the paragraph. Then the closing tag, which begins with a slash. Together, everything together is the elements. The elements are actually what make up the content and the structure of your web page. They tell the browser what's on the page and how it should be organized. You understand what I'm saying? Now, attributes. Attributes provide extra information about a HTML element. Think of it as describing a person. For example, let's say John Doe. This person might have certain attributes like height, weight, age, and so many more. These attributes add more details and help you define the person better. That is also how it is in HTML. HTML attributes, they help you add more meaning and give more definition to a particular tag. For example, look at the image tag. The image tag has a source attribute. It also has an alt attribute. The source attribute is telling you where you can fetch a particular image. The alt attribute is saying, if I don't find this image for one reason or the other in this location, what do I display? I'm just going to display site logo. So there's another example, the A tag. The A tag is mostly used to make links in HTML. It has a href attribute, which is asking you to go to a particular location, to go to a particular link. That is what the href. So we have so many other attributes that we are going to be looking at, but This is just the concept of attribute. It is adding more definition to a tag. Now let's talk about comments in HTML. Comments are like little notes you leave inside your code. They don't appear on the actual web page, so visitors won't see them. But they are helpful when you want to explain a part of your code, either for other developers who you are working with, or your future self, when you come back later to your code to see what you have done. So comment also has its own syntax that you can see here. This wraps your message within the comment syntax, and it tells the browser to ignore it. So using comments help to keep your code clean and understandable, and it's also easy to maintain, especially as your project grows. But in cybersecurity, when we start our cybersecurity series, we'll explore whether HTML comments are really very important in your code, and we'll also see how, if you use them, if you misuse them, you could also expose sensitive information to your code. But that is for cybersecurity. But it is just enough to know that HTML supports comments and that they help to keep your code organized. But how you use it and if you should use it will depend on your code and how secured you want your project to be. Now we understand the basic building block of HTML, the tags, the elements, the attributes, the comments. Let's see how they all come together. This is just a basic structure of HTML. Now we have the doc type declaration at the top. This is telling the browser that, hey, this is a HTML5 document. So it helps the browser to understand and also render the page. So next we have the HTML tag. This is wrapping everything on the page, as you can see. So we typically have two sections inside the HTML tag. We have the head tag and the body. The head tag contains metadata information about the page, for example, the title of the page and some other things that we usually put inside the head, but the most obvious is usually the title. The title tag inside the head is setting the title for the browser. Then we move to the body. This is where all the visible content of your web page would be. So anything you want the users to see, like your heading, your paragraph, the images, the links, your videos, whatever content that you want your users to see is usually inside of the body tag. So this is just a simple structure of what a HTML page looks like. It's just like the basic skeleton of a simple web page. So now we want to set up our HTML environment. Technically, you don't need to install anything if you want to start writing HTML. Your notepad is okay to start writing HTML, but if you want to work like a professional and also make life easy for you, we highly recommend that you use the Visual Studio Code or VS Code. You can download it for free from the link is going to be in the description of this video, so you can just download it for free. Once it is downloaded, you install it and you set it up. You set up your environment. The first thing you want to do is to create a new folder on your computer. For example, you can call it my website or whatever you want to call it. So you open that folder in VS Code, then you create a new file. You name it index.html. This is what we usually call the first HTML file. Like the first file in your HTML folder is usually index.html file, because once you run that folder, that is the file that is going to open. So you save the file as index.html, open it on the browser. So let's get started building our web page. So let's start writing our HTML codes. The first thing we want to do is to be sure that we have Visual Studio Code installed. If you don't have Visual Studio Code installed, it's okay to go to the link code.visualstudio.com, then download Visual Studio Code for your PC. If you're using a Windows, if you're using a Mac, or if you're using a Linux system, you download Visual Studio Code, then follow the installer to complete the installation process. Then when you have Visual Studio Code installed, the next thing you want to do is to create a folder. So here we want to create a folder. You can call the folder any name, but we want to create a folder that we're going to call my website. We're going to call it my website. Now we're going to open my website with Visual Studio Code. To do that easily, you can just double click on your Visual Studio Code to get it opened. Now it's opened, you can just drag the website folder inside Visual Studio Code. You can just drag it inside Visual Studio Code, and now it's opened. So now we have opened the folder with Visual Studio. We want to create an index file inside the folder. An index file, index.html file, is the root file. It is where we begin to write our code. Normally the index.html file should be the first file you write in your website folder. So we're going to create the new, click on the new file button, and we're going to create a file that we'll call index.html. Now index.html is already opened. We can now begin to write our HTML code inside here. The first thing we want to do is to make the browser understand that this is a HTML document. To do that, we're going to use the doctype declaration. The doctype declaration is telling the browser that, hey, this is a HTML document. After that, we want to write our HTML tag. Now we have opened our HTML tag and we have also closed it. So using Visual Studio Code makes it easy that it already gives you the closing tag for free. So once you just write the opening tag, you don't have to remember that you have to close it. Visual Studio Code closes it for you automatically. So inside the HTML tag, this is where all our HTML code would be. So we want to make the head section of our website. In the head section can hold a lot of meta information, but now we just want to make it hold the title. So we open the title tag, then inside the title tag we can write it content inside of it. We can say my first website. So if you look at this is an element, right? Because it has the title, opening tag, some content inside of it, and the title closing tag. So we can already view this and see what it looks like. What we have to do is to press Ctrl S. When we press Ctrl S means to save our document. Now we have to view what we have done so far on the browser. To do that, we just double click on our website folder and double click. So once we double click, we see it is open. I'm going to close this. So you see my first website is at the top there. What this means is that it is showing you that the title of the website is my first website. So I would like to make this, I like to keep it like this so that whenever we make changes inside of our Visual Studio editor, we can just reload to see the result in real time. But there is an extension that we can use to do this instead of having to reload every time. But we are starting out in HTML. We want to start out very simple. Now the next thing we want to do is to declare the body of this document. All the physical parts of the website, everything you can see on your website, the text, the images, the videos, the audios, everything that makes up the web content would be inside the body. But now let's start with HTML headings. HTML has up to H1 to H6. So let's see what H1 looks like. H1 is usually the first heading. It's usually the biggest heading, which you use to make a very large announcement. If you Ctrl S and reload this, you're going to see on the page my first heading. If you try H2, H2 is the second heading. H2 is usually smaller than H1, and H3 is going to be smaller than H2. We can see it, the third heading. It's going to be smaller than H3, so it has up to let's get this wrong there. So it has HTML has up to 6 headings, H1 up to H6. Okay, now let's look at the paragraph in HTML. I save this and I reload. You see, this is a paragraph. So what the p tag does is to define a paragraph. It's like, you see, a block of text that separates, other block of text. That's what the paragraph does. So we can make some formatting in this paragraph. For example, we can make bold text, italics text, underline text. So let's see how we can do those things on different paragraph. So this text is gonna be bold. I save this, Ctrl S, and I reload. I see the text is just like a normal text, but if I want this text to be bold, I can wrap it in the strong tag. What I mean is, I can make the strong tag, then I wrap it inside of it. If I save this and I reload, I see that the text is bold. So I can make another paragraph with with an italic text. Yeah, I can. This text is italic. When I save this and I reload, I see the text is just like a normal text. But when I wrap this in, I can do this in two ways. I can wrap this just in the I tag. When I save this, I see it's italic. Or I can also wrap it in the EM. The EM is like I'm making an emphasis or something. It's also going to be italic. I still get the same result if I use I or if I use the EM tag. So some other thing we want to see is the underline tag. So if I make another paragraph and say this text is underlined, if I save this and I reload, it's a normal text. But if I wrap this text inside another tag, I want to wrap it under the U tag. This. If I wrap this under the U tag and I Ctrl S and I reload, I see that the text is underlined. So these are simple HTML formatting. Before we go into the HTML list, I want to introduce the HTML comments to you. Now, normally this is the HTML comments syntax. Whatever I write here would be invisible in the browser. This text will be invisible. If I save this and I reload, I don't get to see this text on my browser. So I'm just going to use this HTML comment to show the different HTML concepts that we are talking about. So now here we want to talk about HTML lists. Here we already talked about HTML headers. Here we talked about HTML paragraph and formatting. So now we want to talk about HTML list. Now HTML has two kinds of lists. We have the ordered list and the unordered list. First, we want to talk about the ordered list. We're going to see the unordered list and we're going to see the difference. So I want to make a title here for the unordered list. So to make lists in HTML, we start with the UL tag. The UL, like you see, is unordered list. UL unordered list. So now we are going to list the items. Inside this list, what items do we want? Okay, let's list some of the let's list the front-end components in web development. The first on the list is HTML. If I save this and I reload, I'm going to see the title on ordered list, and I'm going to see the first list item, li, which is HTML. I can add another list item. I can add CSS. If I save that and reload, I'm going to see CSS. I can add another list item. I can add JavaScript. If I save and reload, I'm going to see JavaScript. This is unordered list, HTML unordered list. So let's look at the HTML ordered list. So now by default, we already know that let's wrap that in a H2 ordered list. So by default, we already know if UL is on ordered list is going to be OL. To declare ordered list is going to be OL, right? So then we can also list the items. We can list the same items, LI. We can list HTML. If I save that and I reload, I'm going to see ordered list HTML. If I add another list item, CSX for example, if I save that and I reload the page, I'm going to see CSS. Let's add the third list item, JavaScript. If I save that and I reload, I always have to do Ctrl S so to save and reload. So I can see clearly that in the unordered list it's just the dots, you can see, but in the ordered list there are numbers. So in HTML list, we could further make the list the way we want. We can decide to use Arabic numerals or Roman numerals depending on what you want in the list. But this is another level of HTML list. So let's just look at all the tags before we start going deeper into them. The next thing I want us to look at is HTML links. So we can just put now links. I'm going to make a header for HTML links. So HTML links, you declare HTML link using the A tag. The A tag has an attribute, the href attribute, which you can use to send the user to a particular page or outside of your website, depending on what you want the link to do. So here is usually where you put the URL, HTTPS if you're using SSL, any website URL you want.com. Then you close your A tag. If we save this and we reload, you're not gonna see anything. That is because we have not really put a text inside of this, inside of the tag. So when we say visit website inside of the tag, if we save and we reload, we're gonna see visit website. So when we click on it, we can see down here that it can take us to, it's taking us to that very website. So this is how to make a link in HTML. So now let's look at images in HTML. So to add images in HTML, we use the img tag. The img tag has its own attributes. The most important attribute is the source attribute, or the src attribute. This source attribute is telling HTML where it can fetch the information from. So usually you want to create a folder in your project. You're going to create a project in a folder. We call this the image folder or images folder. All the images you're going to be using in your project should be stored inside of the images folder. So I'm going to get some images inside of this folder. So now to import the image, I already have the 2 images that I would like to use for my web project here. So I have to reference the directory where the image is. So now we know that the images that we want for our project is inside the images folder. So the images folder slash which of the images we want. So let's choose the first image, which is web photo 2. If we save this and we reload, we're gonna see the image is quite very large. It's displaying, but it's quite very large. So we can add more attributes to define this image better. The first attribute we could add is the width attribute. We could add the width attribute. We can make the width 300. If we save and reload, we see that the image has adjusted to width 300. We can add a height attribute if we want. We can make the height something, let's say 300 too. If we save and we reload, we see that the height has adjusted, but I think it was better with just the width alone. If we save and we reload, we see the width. We can import the other image too, the same, using the image tag src, which is the source attribute. It's inside of the folder images. Then inside the folder images, we want to choose a particular photo. Now we are choosing the second photo. The auth attribute now is something that's going to display if, for example, for one reason or the other, this images was not found, maybe due to corrupted images or network problem, or for example, let's see what the auth attribute. We want to call this test photo, and let's also set a width for it. A width attribute, make it 300. We save, we reload, we see the image is displayed successfully. But let's cause an intentional error. We know there is no web photo -3, right? But let's just make an intentional error for an image that does not exist. If we reload this, we're going to see test photo, which is what displays this auth attribute. The test photo is what displays if the image doesn't exist. But if the image exists, we save, we reload, it displays the actual image. I hope you understand. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about in this HTML beginner series is the HTML table. So let me just make a header for it. HTML table. If I save and I reload, I just see HTML table. I save, I reload, it should be corrected. Yeah, HTML table. So a HTML table is just like the table you see in real life, it contains rows and columns to display information, to display data in a structured grid-like format. So in HTML, we declare a table using the table tag. This is the table tag, opening and closing tag. Now inside the table tag, we want to display table row and a table information. So the first thing we do after declaring the table is to create a table row. Each information is inside a row. Inside the table row, the first table row usually is where we want to put the table header. For example, we just want to create a simple table that has name and age. The table head, name and age. If we save this and we reload, we're going to see that we have a table with column name and age. So these are inside one table row. So we want to begin to populate the table now. We create another table row. Then inside the table row, this time we're going to use table data. Table data is like each cell of information inside the table, not table header this time. So the first name, for example, can be John. Then the age, the table data for the age can be 25. If we save this and we reload, we're going to see the table. We can create another information inside the table. All we have to do is just create another table row. Then inside the table row, we put another table data. This time we can put Peter, and we can give Peter age, maybe 30. If we save this and we reload, we're gonna see, that we have two data inside the column. So the table may look so bare for now, but we can add some attributes to this table, right? What attribute can we add to this table? Let's add a border attribute. We can set the border of this table to 1. If we save this and we reload, we can see the table has border attributes of 1. Okay, so I can add other attributes to this table to make it, more beautiful. Instead of I'm not using CSS now, we're not talking about CSS, but yeah, we can add more attributes to make this table looking, more engaging, let me say. So I can use the width attributes. The width attributes can be in pixel or in percentage. If I say 300, I just set the width to 300. I see it adjusted to 300. But if I make this 50%, we're gonna see it's also going to take 50% of the screen size. So I think 50% is okay. I can align this table to the center. I can use the align attribute. I can align it to the center. I save and reload. It's in the center. I can align to the right if I want. It's to the right of the page, or I can align left, whatever I want, but let's leave it at the center. Something else I can do is to increase the cell padding and the cell spacing. The table has a cell padding attribute. Cell padding. I can set the cell padding to 5. I save, I reload. You see how much space it is within the content right now. If I remove it, just pay attention to what it is when there is no cell padding. I save, I reload. So you see what it is without cell padding, but when I add cell padding, you see that there's enough space between the contents. So I can also add a cell spacing attribute. There's a cell spacing attribute. I can set cell spacing to, let's say 10. I save, I reload. So you see what the cell spacing, how the cell spacing is different from the cell padding. Something else we can add, there's a BG, there's a background color attribute. That's BG color. Well, I'm doing it outside the tag. There's a BG color attribute. We can set the BG color to green, for example. I reload this, and yeah, the entire table is green. So these are some of the attributes that we can use in HTML to style, to beautify the table without CSS. Okay, so this will be the end of our HTML beginner series. In the next video, we'll be building a full website with just HTML, no CSS. All right, thank you guys. See you in the next video.